You know, if you read any history, if you really read it, like, and you don't come away with the idea that evil exists, it's like you're just reading the wrong kind of history, you know. It's just unbelievable what people can do to each other. And we're so imaginative, you know. And one of the things I figured out about people, the reason that we have the knowledge of good and evil, let's say, is that because we're self-conscious and we know about ourselves, we know about our own vulnerability, right? You know what hurts you. You really know what hurts you, way more than an animal knows. And so, and you're also creative, and so once you know what hurts you, man, you can really hurt someone else. And you can do it in such a creative way. You can draw it out, you can make it excruciating, you can take people apart physically and psychologically, and you can keep them, say, even right on the edge of death, so that you can keep doing that endlessly. And you know, that happens a hell of a lot more than you think it happens. It happens a lot. And so, well, and you think, well, you know, that doesn't involve me. It's like, oh yes it does, man. That's the problem, because you know, you're human, and that's the sort of things that human beings are capable of. And I'm not saying it's all probable that you do that ever, or that, but I'm saying that, you know, you got to take that into account. When you're looking at the world and you think about all the perpetrators out there, it's like, it's not like there's perpetrators and there's victims. That isn't how it works. It doesn't work that way at all. And so the horrors of humanity, as well as the noble elements of humanity, are all elements of your central being. And for Jung, and this is the terrible thing, for Jung, the pathway to higher wisdom was through the terrible portal of, well, you could say hell, for that matter. Really. And so who wants to do that, man? It's like, no. You know, like maybe you're resentful about something. Well, you probably are, because like everybody's resentful about something, you know. And resentment is just a vicious emotion. It's really useful. It's really useful, because if you're resentful about something, it either means that you should grow the hell up and accept the responsibility and quit sniveling around and whining, or it means that someone actually is oppressing you and pushing on you too hard and bullying you and demeaning you, and you have something to say or do that you're not saying or doing. And no wonder you're not saying or doing it, because, you know, it can be really dangerous to say things or do them to free yourself from being oppressed. You can get in a lot of trouble in the short term for doing it, so it's easier just to not say anything, sort of day after day. In the short term you protect yourself, but it just crushes you. And then the resentment comes up, and resentment, man, that can just get so out of hand, you know. It starts with resentment, and then it goes to the desire for revenge, you know, because you'll play nasty little tricks on the person that's oppressing you at any chance. You'll talk about them behind their back, and if they want you to do something, you'll do it badly, or you'll do it grudgingly, or you'll do a half-rate job, and you'll set up little traps, and you know, so it puts you in a poisonous space. And then if you really start to dwell on that, say, in your basement for 3 or 4 years about just exactly how terrible the world is, and how that's focused on you, and how everyone's rejected you, and how you get to this point where you're thinking that, you know, existence itself is a kind of poisonous endeavor, and that the best thing for you to do is go out there and do as much, you know, create as much mayhem as you possibly can. And if you really get to a dark place, you think, I'm going to create as much mayhem as I possibly can by targeting the most innocent thing I can possibly imagine. And so that's a bad road, man. There's dark things down there, but you can go there, and people do, and they go through the hole of resentment. And so resentment can tell you you've got something to say. You bloody well better say it. You've got to free yourself from what's oppressing you. You have to stand up for that, because otherwise you become oppressed, and then once you're oppressed, that's just not so good. So, all right, so the individual, as like culture and like nature, also has its negative element. Jung would call that the shadow, you know, and we're going to discuss the shadow in some detail, because one of the things that Jung believed, and he kind of got this idea from Nietzsche, was that when you grow up, and maybe as a consequence of your temperament, you tend to think that some of your attributes are good and some of them are negative, you know. So you make moral judgments about them, and fair enough. So, you know, you might think, for the psychoanalysts, the two elements of human being that were commonly regarded as negative from a moral perspective were sexuality and aggression. But Jung's notion is that well, you know, you might be someone who's modest and careful and never causes any conflict, and then we might say, well, you're a well socialized person. But Jung's point would be, yeah, but you got no power. You've got no power. And so people are just going to roll right over you. So you better dive into that morass of sexuality and aggression and pull out those powers and integrate them into your psyche so that you can use them consciously, because without that you're harmless. But you know, I don't think that's a very good ambition. You know, what do you want to be when you're 30? Well, I want to be harmless. It's like, you know, really, that's what you want to be? It's like you might as well not even be if that's your goal. So you know, this dichotomy between the positive individual and the negative individual is very, very complex, because what's positive and what's negative is not obvious from the beginning, and arbitrary judgments don't help. It's very difficult for a given individual to look at themselves and say, well, what is it about me that's actually worth developing? And I can tie this into some degree into Big Five theory. So one of the Big Five characteristics is agreeableness, eh? And people tend to think of agreeableness as a virtue, which is it's completely idiotic to think that, because every virtue has its vice. But agreeable people are sympathetic and empathetic and compassionate and polite, and those all sound like good things. But they're also part of being an Oedipal parent, by the way. But anyways, the problem with being agreeable is that people take advantage of you, and then you get resentful. So I'm sure there's a whole pile of you in here that are agreeable and resentful. You know, I'm sure you know who you are. And one of the things I would mention, and you should think about this because it'll help you a lot if you do it, is that resentment is your best friend. If something makes you resentful, do not do it. So, or there's a more sophisticated rule, which is, if something makes you resentful, there's only two possibilities. One is that you're sniveling and immature and you won't adopt your responsibilities and you're whining about it. The other is that you're being pushed around and people are attempting to enslave you. So, you want to eliminate the first possibility, right? You got to think, well, am I just being immature and whiny about this? Is it something that people are reasonably demanding of me? And if you think that through, and maybe you talk to some people about it, and you think, no, this isn't reasonable, then the resentment is telling you, act. Because otherwise, that's what you'll be. You'll end up 15 years, especially if you're married or something like that, with 8,000 things you're resentful about, and then, you know, you'll be in some kind of painful divorce that lasts for 10 years. So better to nip it in the bud. If someone is after you to do something, and you don't feel like you're getting proper regard or proper response, or you don't think it's fair, it's like, have some courage and get a hold of your anger and use it. Doesn't mean you're right, but at least it means you can push the person hard enough so they have to engage in a dialogue with you. And you know, these are necessary skills. Like, if you cannot do this, you have to be able to say no to negotiate. You have to be able to say no, so you always want to put yourself in a position where you can do that.